So I've been playing Metal Gear Solid 4. So with MGS5 around the corner, I thought it would be cool to look at the game that came before it, from a numerical standpoint at least. Now, out of all MGS games, I'd say I have the least experience with this one. Thing is that because of personal reasons, I wasn't able to play any games at all by the time this came out. So it wasn't until somewhere in 2010 that I got to play this game, along with pretty much every other PS3 game released up to that point. And not having had any experience with that particular console generation, I was pretty overwhelmed by everything the game had to offer. So I wasn't really able to look at it critically, and I had a hard time grasping most of the game because it was the first game I had played in years. Now, after doing some research, I found out that the fan base is a little indifferent about this game. I honestly never thought any less of it compared to the others, although that could just be because I was completely blinded by the fancy graphics back when I first played this. But now, I find it hard not to be a bit critical of a game that is also very critical of us. I mean, the game is filled with commentary on both real-life issues and of the MGS fanbase and what they've come to expect from the series. The TV shows at the beginning make this really obvious in a lot of ways. Still, in a stark contrast to that, the game is also filled to the brim with fan service. It almost seems as if Kojima was a little reluctant to work on this game, but also still madly in love with Solid Snake. Which would make sense, seeing as if you would stop, Konami would just give the series to another developer, and it would most likely get fucked. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure he still loves doing what he does, but I still feel that Konami and the fans expected a lot out of him at this point, and they really wanted him to do a lot of things at the same time. I definitely feel that this had a negative influence on the game. I mean, it feels kinda like a mixed bag. To me, the game feels like it tries to do too much at the same time. And as it turns out, I'm not alone. Many fans felt like this when the game came out, even though it might ironically be their fault to begin with. Still, the game could have been a total train wreck. And in my opinion, it certainly isn't. Anyway, the game's story picks up 9 years after the events of MGS2. Basically, war has changed, and is now mostly fought by PMC soldiers. These PMC soldiers are all artificially enhanced with nanomachines. So, all the things that made war somewhat humane have now disappeared. Now, these nanomachines function via a network called SOP, Sons of the Patriots. And the game's villain, Liquid Blushy Butt, wants to hack the system. Insert Solid Snake. My hero! Solid Snake needs to stop Liquid from executing his evil plan, and tie up some loose plot ends in the process. All of this basically boils down to Snake going and Ocelot going, brother! And then they kiss. At least, that's the severely dumbed down version. To go into the story really in depth would not only spoil everything, but also force me to explain the story of all the other games. I'm not doing that. If you haven't played any of the other MGS games, check out the other games first, as this game is hard enough to understand with knowledge of previous events, let alone without. Regardless of that though, I will go into some fanboy bullshit about the game's plot and its shortcomings later on in this video. Anyway, gameplay-wise, it's very much like the other MGS games, but then with less of an emphasis on stealth and more of a focus on action. Still, a lot of things from the previous games remain, and I certainly don't think that's a bad thing. If anything, it slightly improves on a lot of things, like the camo. In MGS3, when you wanted to change your camouflage, you had to open a start menu and browse around until you found what you were looking for. While this wasn't necessarily bad, it could have been a lot smoother. Now it is. Basically, when Snake touches a certain texture for a few seconds, his suit mimics it. I really like this, and I'm impressed with how well it actually works. Also, the camera improved quite a bit in terms of functionality. You could argue that this is because of the focus on action, but the bird's eye view of the previous games has now been switched for a third-person over-the-shoulder type angle. This makes shooting a lot easier, and it almost makes you feel like the game encourages you to do so. That said, there is still plenty of stealth around, and it's far from something like Gears of War or Resident Evil 6. Also, the game has a psych meter, which indicates how stressed and tired Snake is from constantly being on a war zone. Snake being stressed can cause things like difficulty aiming or passing out upon receiving damage. To calm him the fuck down, you can do things like smoking a cigarette, having a snack, or just having a lie down. The game also has upgradable weapons. When you pick up a weapon on the field, it gets sold automatically, and that earns you Dragon points. These points can be spent for new weapons, ammo, and upgrades. I like the addition, but it also feels kinda pointless. I mean, you can play the game fine without really using it, and buying ammo could have easily been replaced with you just finding it. It's done well enough though, and I did like shooting shit with my fully upgraded M4. Still, you could argue if that really has any place in a game based around stealth. And things like being able to buy ammo everywhere at any time also makes it feel a bit more like an action game. Also, on a side note, there's this motor segment, which literally has explosive barrels levels of gameplay. Do not want. How about the bosses? I largely agree with most people saying that they lack imagination. Because, well, they just kinda do. They all pretty much have exactly the same backstory, and half of them are just there for the sake of pandering to fans. Also, at the end of every fight they do this really weird scream thing. Like, why would you even leave that in? Just... oh, God. Now, time for some fanboy bullshit. One thing a lot of fans seem to be peeved about is the extreme exposition, mainly the scene by the Volta River. And I agree that it may be a bit too much. Still, seeing the nature of Liquid's character and his love for the sound of his own voice, it seems kind of fitting. It's ridiculous exposition for a ridiculous character. That doesn't quite explain all the other cutscenes being insanely long though. Not to mention the mission briefings. But to be fair, if it were any other Metal Gear up to this point, they would have all been 1-hour codec calls. So at least it's some kind of an improvement, I guess. Still, I'm not really defending it though, because I'd say that the people that think the cutscenes are way too long and frequent are totally right. I mean, I quit playing at the end of Act 2 and started the next day with Act 3. Including the mission briefing, it took 38 minutes for the game to decide it was okay for me to press buttons. So yeah, I can see why so many people are put off by this. And I definitely think that this is the wrong way of going about designing your game. But personally, I just really like it. And I know I'm in the vast minority here. A minority that I would say is objectively wrong, but I can't just help but liking its movie likeness. Now what I don't like is Johnny, or Akiba. Thing is, his character always used to be a comic relief Easter egg type of thing. Something that if you had paid attention throughout the entire series, you could piece this shit together yourself. And maybe find out that this funny character is actually the same guy. But even then it was nothing more than a joke. Now he's an actual character. And the game also just outright tells you what could have otherwise been a fun little mystery. It just feels like a type of fan service more than anything, and I don't like it at all. Not to mention that this little queef is also responsible for what is possibly the dumbest scene in the entire series. And considering all the things that happened prior, says quite a bit. I also think the game may have had some cut content, because of its somewhat pressured development. I suspect there was a sewer level right before the Volta River. It makes sense when looking at the transition, and in Metal Gear Online, there were 2 levels that further raised my suspicion. One of which, a level called Tomb of Tubes, was actually set in a sewer. And the other, called Ravaged Riverfront, further expanded on the area around the Volta River. It's all just speculation, and I'm probably just being a douche, but it still made me wonder. Anyway, I still think it's a great game, even though it tries to do a bit too much. But it still stands as a testament as to why Metal Gear is my favorite series. And sure, it's really far with its head up its own ass, but that's mostly just because its ass is a really comfy place to rest your head.
Evil mustache.
Evil.
Evil? So much evil!
Alright, cutscene of
And there
Snake's
is,
ass.
who was that guy?
Walter Albert something.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's not important. He's gonna die, and
Nobody
all of a
really
sudden,
cares. Oh, Baker. Yeah, he was the guy of Armstead or something.
yeah. Then Ocelot shows up, and he's all like, "I'm here to crash the party, Snake." And Snake's like, "Arrgh!" And now they're fighting.
And then he goes like, kiss me, Snake, hurt me more.
Ocelot, I can feel your mustache. And he's, oh yes, and it's all very awesome.
Yes, so now we're gonna fight him.